The research station on Velker 9 smelled like ozone and something faintly floral, a combination that Lyra Vera had come to associate with alien mornings. She'd been stationed here for 4 months, the only human embedded with the Kethari Xenobiology Exchange, and she'd learned to love the smell the same way she'd learned to love instant ration packets and gravity that was 8% too strong for her spine. She was fine. Humans were always fine. It was a Tuesday, or what passed for one, when Raxer Thorn decided she was prey. He was the youngest cub of the Thorn litter, assigned to the station under the watchful eye of his mother, Commander Vel Thorn, who ran xenobiology with the quiet authority of a creature that had once wrestled a borealis serpent into submission with her bare hands. Raxer was not yet grown. His ears were still slightly too large for his skull, and his tail had a habit of betraying his emotions in ways he clearly found embarrassing. He was, by the standards of the Kethari, a child. By the standards of any predator species, he was approximately 40 kilograms of muscle, instinct, and needle-sharp retractable claws. He had been watching Lyra Vera for 3 weeks with the particular focus that young predators reserve for things they haven't decided are safe yet. She had been watching him back, mostly because he was adorable and she had the good sense not to say that out loud. It happened in Lab 7, where Lyra was running soil sample analyses and making absolutely terrible coffee in the corner unit that only she ever touched. Raxer Thorn had wandered in on the pretense of checking the atmospheric readings. Lyra had noticed him immediately. She'd gotten good at noticing, but kept her eyes on her screen, moving slowly, the way she'd learned to move around anything that had claws. She was reaching across the counter for her mug when Raxer made his move. It wasn't a real attack. Even in the moment, some part of Lyra's nervous system understood that. He had telegraphed it 6 ways, the shoulder drop, the tail lash, the low crouch that his species apparently couldn't help doing before a pounce no matter how old they got. He snarled, a short, sharp sound like tearing Velcro mixed with a thunderclap, and batted at her sleeve with one paw, claws politely retracted. A play strike. A test. The Kethari equivalent of let's see what you do. Lyra Vera did not flinch. She had grown up in the highlands of northern Cascadia, in a house where the nearest neighbor was 40 minutes away and bears were a practical concern rather than a romantic one. She had, at age 9, accidentally cornered a wolverine in her family's barn and had to talk herself out of the situation through a combination of noise, size illusion, and sheer bloody-mindedness. She had spent 4 months on a planet where the local fauna made wolverines look like houseplants. Her threat responses had long since been recalibrated. She put down her coffee mug very deliberately. She turned to face Raxer Thorn, who was crouching on the counter looking extremely pleased with himself. And Lyra Vera snarled back. It was not a perfect snarl. She didn't have the resonance chambers, the subsonic undertone, the layered harmonics that made a Kethari snarl a genuine neurological event for anyone nearby. What she had was a human throat, 2 years of xenolinguistics training, and 4 months of listening very carefully to every sound the Kethari made when they thought she wasn't paying attention. She pulled air from her diaphragm. She let her lips pull back from her teeth, all of them, the full display, the way she'd seen Commander Vel do when she was making a point that didn't require words. She held eye contact. And she made the sound. It came out rough and imperfect and deeply, fundamentally wrong by any Kethari standard. But it was recognizable. And it was directed. And it did not waver. Raxer Thorn's ears went flat. His tail, which had been lashing with excitement, went very still. Then, slowly, with the gravity of a small celestial body surrendering to a larger one, Raxer Thorn rolled off the counter and flopped onto his back on the floor. His paws went into the air. Lyra stared at him. He stared back at her, upside down, with an expression she was starting to recognize as the Kethari equivalent of I am completely reassessing everything I thought I knew. Okay, said Lyra, after a moment. Okay. Hi. Raxer's tail made one small, uncertain movement. Lyra crouched down to his level, not too fast, not looming, and held out the back of her hand the way she'd been doing with the adult researchers when she first arrived, the low-threat greeting that Commander Vel had taught her in the first week. Let them come to you. Let them choose. Raxorthorn stared at her hand. Then he head-butted it with enough force to nearly knock her over. Commander Velthorn found out about the incident approximately 4 minutes later, because a Kethari station is a place where nothing remains private for long, and her youngest cub had already managed to telegraph the entire encounter to 3 of his siblings via the subsonic communication network that the Kethari maintained and that the human monitoring equipment still couldn't fully parse. She came to Lab 7 with the measured stride of someone who is not worried but has decided to verify that personally. She found Lyra Vera sitting on the floor with Raxorthorn sprawled half across her lap, purring, not the polite social purr, but the deep structural rumble that meant genuine comfort, while Lyra scratched behind his 2 large ears and talked to him in the slow, patient Kethari she'd been practicing since month 2. Commander Vel stood in the doorway for a long moment. He tested you, she said finally. It wasn't a question. Yes, Lyra said, not looking up. I snarled back. It was probably terrible. It was, said Commander Vel, I could hear the recording. You sounded like a wet hinge. But... The commander was quiet for a moment. Her tail moved in a small, deliberate arc that Lyra had come to understand meant I am choosing my words carefully. But you did not look away, said Velthorn. You did not freeze. You did not make yourself small. She paused. You answered in our language. Badly. But you answered. Raxor made a sound like a small engine starting. He decided you're safe, Vel said. That's what the floor show means. He showed you his belly. That is, she paused again, and something in her expression shifted. That is not a thing we do easily. Or often. Lyra Vera looked up then, and met the commander's gaze. I know, she said quietly. Later, when the xenobiology team had their weekly debrief, there was a long discussion about the incident. Dr. Farax, the senior Kethari behavioral specialist, had 17 opinions about what it meant for interspecies integration protocols. Junior researcher Seville kept replaying the audio of Lyra's snarl and making a sound that Lyra had learned meant suppressed laughter. Commander Vel sat at the head of the table with her arms crossed and said nothing, which in her case communicated a great deal. What got written into the official record was this: human subject displayed appropriate non-aggressive dominance response to juvenile social test. Response accepted. Juvenile has incorporated human into primary trust group. What did not get written into the record was the moment after the debrief, when Commander Vel caught Lyra in the corridor and walked beside her in silence for a full 30 seconds before speaking. My cub does not trust easily, she said. I know, said Lyra. He trusted you before you snarled, said Vel, the snarl just confirmed it. Lyra looked at her. He'd already decided, Vel said. He was just checking if you knew. That night, Lyra Vera sat in her bunk on Velker 9 with Raxorthorn curled into an improbable shape against her side. He was enormous, really, when you stopped thinking of him as small, all muscle and warmth and that deep structural purr, and wrote her weekly report home. Station morale good, she typed. Making progress with the team. The work is meaningful. I think I'm starting to understand something about trust, how it moves across species, how it's built, what it looks like when a creature that could absolutely end you decides instead to show you its throat. Turns out it looks a lot like what trust looks like anywhere. It looks like choosing to be seen. She sent the report. She turned off the light. Raxorthorn made a sound like a small, content thunderstorm. Lyra Vera, human, death world girl, scratched behind his 2 large ears in the dark, and felt, for the first time in 4 months, completely at home.